Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. Today, our guest is Tricia Remacle. Tricia is a previous colleague and leader on the product and technology side. She currently does consulting work across a number of different verticals. But in the past, Tricia has been a CTO, head of product, head of program, and even head of project management. She's kind of done it all, which is awesome. I met Tricia when she was running program management for me at a company where I was CTO, and she was always one of the most thoughtful people in my leadership team. I'm super glad that she's been able to join us today, and we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. Welcome to the podcast, Tricia. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Bobby. I'm glad to be here.
So thanks so much for joining. And as always, we'll warm up, Tricia, with some of our get to know you questions. These are super easy questions, I promise, not terribly difficult, but just to get us kind of like into the groove of things. First question is, I know you're a lover of traveling. So what is your ideal kind of vacation or travel itinerary? Are you more of a beach person or more of a city person or both?
Oh, wow. So my husband and I are both sailors and divers. So probably our favorite vacation is where we can go someplace and charter our own sailboat and go to interesting dive locations. But we like to
Yeah.
also balance that out with, travel to Europe, travel to other places that are more cultural. So we kind of do one beach vacation or one sailing vacation and one cultural vacation every year.
That's awesome. Was it difficult to get your all the certifications for scuba diving?
So my husband's a master scuba diver, and that's quite an accomplishment. It takes a lot of hours to get to that level. I am just open water, and it isn't that hard. I mean, you have to go through obviously classroom instruction and then some pool work, and then you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to do all your skills in open water.
Got it. Okay. Well, then your husband, is he a watch guy? Because he must have one of those Submariners or something like that, right? Dive watches?
He basically dives with a very high end computer. So
Yeah. Okay. He's one of the digital watch
yes.
people. Okay. Got it. I'm a big watch person, so I was just wondering about that. I have a diving watch. I have a few diving watches, but I never really go diving. So I need to talk to your husband and get certified here one of these days. That's cool. Okay. Got one more for you. Also an easy one. What do you do in your spare time when you're not doing CTO stuff?
So one of the things that I do in my spare time is I like to foster dogs. I work with we have
Oh,
two dogs of
cool.
our own that we adopted, but I now work with a rescue league and we foster puppies,
Wow.
which is a ton of fun, but also
That sounds like it.
all consuming. Um,
Yeah,
but I'm
that'll
also
work.
into, Pilates and yoga and just, keeping
Okay.
healthy and trying to,
Sure. That's awesome.
yep.
Yep, I know the pet life. I have two cats and they're crazy. You're probably going to hear them or see them on this podcast here any minute now. But yeah, puppies are, I had dogs growing up, German Shepherds. We had two German Shepherds growing up, so I love dogs too. Um, okay, slightly more difficult one for you this time. Um, AWS or Azure?
Uh, AWS.
All right, okay. You just
Um,
annoyed 50% of our audience over
yeah,
there. All
I guess
good.
I could say both, but all of my experience has been, most of my deep experience has been with products hosted on AWS. So I'm much more
Yeah,
familiar with AWS.
yeah, yeah. I got sort of exposed to Azure when it was a little bit more recently when it's become more mature, and I am more impressed by it these days. They're just doing a lot, I think, to compete. And then I think I would say GCP. And some of the other ones are a little further behind, right? And some of the maybe they have some specialties that they're good at or whatever. I see a lot of startups just hosting in GCP though, because it's just easier
Yeah.
for them, I guess, because it's all Google Shop or whatever. Okay, cool. So Tricia, that's the end of our little warm-up question here. Thank you. Our audience got to know you a little bit right there, and we just dive into. I always like to ask sort of folks who have gotten into this executive level that you're at, how did you start your career in technology? Did you get right into it, right in the early phases of your career? Did you like accidentally get into it? Like, Tell us about your kind of like origin story, if you will, in the area of product and technology.
Sure. So I have a degree in computer science. So I immediately got out of college and ended up getting a job as software from a software engineering perspective and worked for several companies as a software engineer. But then I ended up landing a position at the Software Productivity Consortium, which is
Hmm.
sort of a sister organization to SEI. And
Okay.
they were working on basically software development life cycles, software development methodologies. It was the
Yeah.
age of, object-oriented methodologies and rational rows. And
Rational Rose, I remember that. Yeah.
the group I was working with was working with a gentleman called Barry Boehm on the spiral process model, which was basically a
Okay. I haven't
precursor
heard
to
of
Agile. So I
that. Okay.
ended up going out and teaching all of our member companies how to basically be agile. It was before
Yeah.
agile was a thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I worked there for quite a while, and then I decided I needed to leave kind of the ivory tower and get back into more, real world work. And so I ended up joining a startup, and
Okay.
they hired me to be their implementation, their client manager and implementation specialist for their software.
Mm.
Uh, they were basically a trade management organization. They automated the export process,
Okay.
and that company grew very quickly. And I basically spent almost a decade there and ended up rising through the ranks and ended up leading the engineering team, eventually moving into product management, and that's kind of what got me into the product management part of my career.
That's interesting. Now, when we met, you were running Agile, right? Like the
Hmm.
Agile practice. And how you did that for a number of years before we met, right? You
Hmm.
had been doing like Agile
Yep.
product program, both management, right?
Yep, I actually did a year at QVC where they were going
Okay.
through an agile transformation. I also worked at Freddie Mac
Okay.
for a while. So yeah.
That's right. That's right. I remember you updating me on some of those things. I've always been curious now that we are sort of many years beyond those times when we were working together. Um, what is so difficult about agile transformations that get companies so hung up and not able to fully execute on them, in your opinion? And we're definitely going to get into like product and technology and all this stuff, but this thing I've always been wanting to ask you for years is like, how come so many companies find it so difficult? I'll give you one small example before you answer. There was a company I was working with, and from top to bottom, every single person wanted to do an agile transformation, and yet 2 or 3 years before I got involved with them, they were still like struggling to do it. And that's when everybody agrees that it even has to be done. So, what's your, after all this experience that you have, what's your take on it?
Well, it's funny. I was speaking at a conference earlier this year, and there was two of the signers of the Agile Manifesto were at the conference, Jim Highsmith and John Kern, and we got into this conversation. They are actually launching something called Reimagining Agile. So anybody out there who's
Nice.
interested in your
Yeah.
question, because they are very frustrated with the turn that Agile has taken and sort of been hijacked by some of these organizations that have come out with all these frameworks, some of them very heavyweight frameworks, and basically saying, this is, if you adopt this framework, then you will, be agile. You'll go through your
Yeah.
agile transformation and it will work. And they're, in talking to them, and I agree with them, right? They basically came up with 10 principles, sorry, 12 principles of what it means to be agile. And it's a lot. And they basically say if you adopt those 12 principles and you really um, talk about a
Hmm.
culture, you have to have a culture that wants to be agile. You have to understand what it means to actually adopt those 12 principles as opposed to just trying to follow a specific framework. And, a lot of people adopt Scrum and they go through, their sprint planning and their daily stand-ups and their retrospectives. And they think if they're going through all the ceremonies that are specified, that therefore that somehow that's going to make them agile. And that's not really the case. It's a lot.
Hmm.
The company needs to take the company organization that wants to be agile needs to take a step back and need to start, need to go back and look at those 12 principles and really
Okay.
understand what it means to embody that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely agreed. That's really interesting that they're doing a reimagine thing. I think it's about time. I mean, it's been, decades since we've thought of it in a new, well, those folks have been thinking about a better way of doing things, I'm sure, but it's good that they're trying to create a new framework. Um, and it was called Reimagining Agile, right?
Yeah, so there's a
Okay.
website out there, and it's called
Okay.
Reimagining Agile, and it's some of the original founders of the
Yeah.
Agile Manifesto are getting together to
That's
do
really
this.
cool. I'm gonna check that out. Um, that's neat. You know what I found, you tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, is that I thought a lot of times product and engineering sort of knows exactly what to do, but it's like getting the whole rest of the business on board with it. It's such a difficult thing to do. And it seems like the rest of the business like wants all the benefits of Agile, but they don't really know how to get there. And the people who know how to get there sort of have a difficult time doing the change management necessary to like make it all transpire in the end, you know? Do you agree with that, or do you think like the challenges are like elsewhere, maybe within the product and technology teams, or in some other aspect of it?
Well, I think there's a balance in some companies. I wouldn't say all companies where like sales or the executive leadership team are looking for predictability. Like they want to go through their business planning process. They want to know exactly what's going to get released. They want to be able to, build their sales plans off of new products that are coming to market. And
Right,
so that drives a level of predictability that needs to be, in the product release cycle. And that
right.
is, anti-agile, right? And to a certain
Hmm.
extent where you can't you can't then innovate, you can't adapt to change, you can't,
Right.
sort of take customer feedback as you're iterating and pivot. So,
Yeah.
um, it's I think there's definitely and it's not all companies, but in some companies there's sort of this disconnect between needing, a predictable release cycle and wanting to be agile and wanting to be innovative.
Right. Yeah. It's that tension that I think messes up a lot of companies. They don't know how to handle it, and so they're sort of stuck in no man's territory for years on end. We're talking about these mid-market companies, 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, 200 million even, and they're not fully agile, and then they're not fully waterfall. They're just kind of like in some territory in the middle, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it gets a job done. But I find more often than not that like some of the big benefits of either side, because waterfall is not all bad or something. It's just you don't get the true benefits of either side of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen that, but it seems to be pretty common.
Yeah, I think it's funny. One of the people I really look up to who rails against um, sort of how agile has impacted the industry in a negative way is Marty Kagan, and
Yeah,
he runs Silicon Valley Product Group, and he'll talk about there's a number of companies, especially outside of Silicon Valley, where they build their roadmaps, and the roadmaps are more feature related, like we're bringing this new feature to market, we're bringing this new capability to market, like, and
yeah.
you've already solutioned the problem, so to speak, and you said
Hmm.
this is the specific thing we're going to bring to market next.
Right,
Whereas in order to be agile, you really need to say, this is the problem we're going to solve in the next year. We've
yeah,
already gone to market. We've already determined that there's a problem in our customer base or in the market opportunity we're going after.
right,
That's the problem we need to solve. We're gonna iterate and innovate to try to figure out what's the best solution to solving that problem. But the way they talk, the way that they go to market, the way that they actually talk about it is, we're going to go solve this problem,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be surprised, and we come up with a really
Right.
cool solution to it, but it's going to take us a couple iterations to get there. And so it's a different way of, I think, thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting conundrum because the product leader has to create a roadmap, and a lot of companies want this like 1 year roadmap. You have no idea, truthfully, what's going to happen in fourth quarter or something, but you're forced to put something down on paper. So then you have to come up with what sounds like a solution. Although the philosophy of what you're talking about, where product goes and figures out what are the biggest, highest ROI, most aligned problems to solve, is the right, to me, is the right thought. That's not how it often manifests itself in the
No,
roadmaps a lot of companies have. What I find interesting also is that a lot of companies that don't think of product in the sense of that that's their job, that the product's going to go figure out the problems to solve. They think product is going to carry out the directives of the rest of the business in terms of the problems that they want to solve. So then you're killing discovery, you're killing innovation, you're right off the bat because it's like, well, somebody comes to product and writes them a ticket or something, so to speak, and says, go solve this problem. And that's not ideal. I think what I've seen work, I don't know if this is what your observation is, but like when product is sitting down with the business side and they're going back and forth on which problems are the best ones to solve. That seems to work best. And it seems like that's like one of the main duties of product, right?
right. Yes. Right. One of the main duties of product is to go out and, talk to the customer base or talk to the prospective customers and figure out, okay, what's your biggest problems? And if we solve that problem, would you pay for that solution? No matter what that is, right? Type of thing.
Yeah.
Is it a big enough problem that you're losing money because of it? And then, coming back and saying, okay, let's experiment, let's iterate, let's figure out what's the best way of solving that problem
Hmm.
for that
Yeah.
customer. And that's what a product led organization is. And a lot of companies are product led.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They want to be product led, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they know what it means. Um, it's interesting. My first startup, um, we had sales and we had engineering. We had no product. This is years ago. And a lot of what I observe, and we live in the same geographic area. You look at all of these companies around here, and a lot of what I see is they actually still don't understand what product management is, and it takes them a couple of years to actually figure it out. And my theory is that, well, sales has always been around since forever. Engineering's been around forever too, because we have computers to deal with and laptops and IT, right? Like the information technology. So those you don't have to explain to anybody. But sales, I mean, product management all of a sudden comes along. I think in 2010, maybe mid 2010s, it started blowing up, and I started seeing lots of companies try to do it. But it's still not really all that well understood. You
No.
know, if you have a CEO who comes from a sales background, she may not get it. If you have a CEO, unless the CEO is from a product background or an engineering background, they almost never get product management.
Well, it's interesting because so Agile came along and talked about a role of a product owner, right? And the role of the product owner was to work with the Scrum team and build the backlog or in the backlog and help, go through sprint planning. And so
Yeah.
it was a role that was embedded with the engineering team. So that's one side of it. Then you've got like organizations like pragmatic marketing. When I first, like
Hmm.
way back when I went through pragmatic marketing, they had uh, a a paradigm that they talked about called Nihito, which is nothing interesting happens in the office, right? And they're talked about, if you're in product management, you need to be out talking to customers, and that's
Right.
your job. And a lot of that time, a lot of organizations were saying, okay, we're going to go look for people who understand the business, who have MBAs, who can go do product management from that perspective. What I'm seeing now is that organizations are sort of coming back around to, they want product management who have an engineering background, have understand what it
That's
means to
interesting.
actually go build solutions, but can
Hmm.
also go out and talk to customers. So you got to have one foot in both worlds. You can't be on either end of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because I noticed the same thing. I think that more companies kind of have this sense of like you have to have some understanding of engineering if you're going to do product right. And I'm even seeing engineers transfer over more to product,
Yeah.
and that's becoming more of a thing. I feel like the discipline of product, though, is just not very old. It's still evolving, everything's constantly changing in it, blah, blah, blah. I don't find that to be true for engineering. Like for engineering, okay, you're going to sit down and write a bunch of code, okay, it's going to be in Python or .NET or Node.js or whatever. Product management, though, it's such an interesting, like, area of any business. It's so connected to all the other parts of the business that you have to be good at talking to sales, you have to be good at talking to engineering, you have to be good at setting a vision, you have to be good at making roadmaps, communicating, have to know the technical parts. It's a very unique and awesome job, and it's, I think, still evolving. Like the originators of Agile are redoing Agile, all kinds of new frameworks come up all the time. Here's one interesting, maybe controversial question for you is, do you think that AI is going to kill large parts of the current day-to-day job of product managers, or is it going to enhance it, or how is it going to change it in your mind?
I think, well, as you talked about, being able to do product management well is really hard because it's the cross function, it's the intersection of so many different disciplines that you need to be able to handle. And so I think what AI is going to do is allow a lot of the more tactical work that product managers needed to do. It's going to hopefully alleviate some of that stuff. Like there's already a tool that's taken off within the product management community called Chat PRD. Um,
Hmm.
and it
Yeah, I
was
saw that.
right. It's an AI solution that basically is trained to basically build PRDs with very little effort. So, all
Yeah.
that, the effort that you used to go through as a product manager to build out, to do all the
Oh yeah.
documentation of
Oh my
requirements and all
God.
that other
Yeah.
stuff, it actually will help with that. So
Right.
I think it's from that person. Uh, I've seen a bunch of tools now where you can actually explain to the tool in text what you want the user interface to look like, and it will generate a high fidelity prototype for you. So
Yeah.
product managers who used to have work with UX designers and take
Hmm.
a bit of time to build a prototype to go and do like multivariant testing or A/B testing with customers in order to test out different user experiences. You'll now be able to use AI to do that prototyping,
Right.
very quickly, and be able
Yeah.
to then, even while you're talking to customers, getting their feedback, feed that directly into the AI model and have the interface, you know, evolve based on the
Yeah.
customer
Yeah.
feedback you're getting. So I think those type
Yeah.
of things are going to be great. It's going to accelerate the iteration process, or what I call the product discovery process. And
Okay.
I think a lot of companies don't do product discovery very well. So
Or at all. Yeah.
or at
Yeah.
all. So
Yeah.
at this point, if this will actually basic because and a lot of the times it's because it was expensive, it was time
Hmm.
consuming, it
Yeah.
you couldn't do it quick enough to get to get the feedback back to engineering. So now that's going to all sort of remove
Yeah.
that bottleneck.
Yeah. And that point that you made, just as a side note, I agree with you on all the stuff about AI adoption. I think companies are always in such a tearing hurry to go somewhere. I don't know where, but they're loath to do discovery. They just like that's like anathema to them. But they're really happy and fine with building the complete wrong things. They're
Yes.
like they'll just throw their hands up at the end of the year and be like, "Oh, well, this last year's roadmap was a disaster, but we'll try again next year."
Yeah.
But they don't want to do the discovery. It cracks me up all the time. But I do think AI, obviously, I think it's going to change products, going to change engineering, it's going to change everything. I think Chat PRD was a really clever name. Um, yeah, I think my own take on it is that there is a ton of sort of overhead or overhead of a laborious nature in product, and all of that can be kind of outsourced to AI. What I'm super interested in is, can we develop an AI where the AI is having customer conversations and asking insightful questions? Now, I saw a sales demo the other day where, there's all these AI startups doing like sales AI, where they'll do a sales call with AI and stuff. And I was thinking, when listening to the demo, which was pretty good, I was thinking, if that can happen, then certainly discovery calls can probably happen, you know? Um, or maybe at first, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there. So there is a tool out there. I don't, and I'm not gonna. It's not gonna come to me right away. But there is a tool out there I saw that helps you go out and do discovery interviews, and it's like a chat bot. So
Yeah,
they basically say that most companies, the way they do discovery is that they either talk to a small subset of customers, which isn't really representative of the broader customer base, and it's
hmm,
normally like your bigger customers or your squeaky wheels, and
yeah,
they'll go do one-on-one interviews with those customers. Or the opposite end of the spectrum is they'll send out a survey to their entire, user base and try to, ask the users certain insightful questions. But
yeah,
again, with the survey, you don't have the conversation. You can't ask the five whys. You can't say,
right,
well,
right, right.
why did you say, say that? And get really the root cause of what they're getting at.
Yeah,
This company basically, their selling point was basically saying, as opposed to sending out that survey, you're going to basically build a conversational chatbot that can
hmm,
talk to the customer and ask those five why questions and really get you
hmm,
more interesting information. And you'll be able to do it, and you'll be able to, you know, scale it to a large number of users in order to then,
right.
and then it ingests all of what all the different users have said, and it does like a SWOT analysis. So it comes back
Oh,
and tells
cool.
you
Yeah,
strengths, this is opportunities and threats are.
yeah,
So
yeah. That is really powerful sounding. There's a company, I'm sure you've heard of, Qualtrics. They
yes.
used to be like a competitor to SurveyMonkey, and I think they're pretty well positioned to build their kind of discovery tools and product. I was talking to somebody over there, and they're kind of getting into the R&D side of that. It does seem like the job of a product manager is going to evolve with AI tools. I feel like the folks that are saying nothing's going to change in AI, or they have a dislike for AI for whatever reasons,
Yeah.
I think they're going to eventually have to come to grips with it,
Yeah.
one way or another. I think this thing is here to stay.
Yep. Yeah, I think the other interesting thing from a product perspective is a number of things that have happened from it within product management is now all the companies are trying to instrument their products in order to understand how users are using,
Yeah.
right? Like what features are being adopted or what's the
Hmm.
customer journey through the product. And so there's a number of solutions that have come up to do this instrumentation. But the problem is that it creates an overwhelming amount of data that product managers
Hmm.
didn't really have the opportunity to
Yeah.
sit down and analyze and get insights out of. So now there's AI tools that are layering on top of them that are
Right.
basically ingesting all that data and basically saying, doing the
Yeah.
analysis for you and telling you what the insights are that you should be
Right.
acting
Exactly.
on.
Shouldn't that should be exactly what Pendo is doing, right?
Yes,
A product like that,
yes,
right? Yeah,
yes.
that's a really good, yeah, observation. I mean, it feels like, where if you divide product up into like just five or six different main parts, each one of those will be massively impacted by AI in the next few years. Actually, I was going to ask you about what you think the timeline is. I always sort of have thought, since the first time I played with ChatGPT was like November 22 or something like that. And I just keep thinking that this thing is like, the innovation is going to get faster and faster, but the adoption side is lagging behind. And it's just the nature of company adopting technology. Do you think that the lag and the gap between innovation and adoption will continue, or is that going to start to close next year and more companies will get more into it and spend more money on it? Or do you think, no, this is like, Tricia, this, there's a lot of companies are still not on the cloud. I mean, can you imagine that? Like 15 years later, it's still not on the cloud. Like, is that what's going to happen with AI, or do you think it's going to be way faster adoption?
I think it's going to be faster. I mean, I have a good friend of mine who's in client management slash sales.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a technical background at all. She's actually a lawyer by trade. Anyway, she just got
Hmm.
trained by her company on Bard, the
Okay.
Microsoft,
Yep.
and she couldn't stop gushing about it. She was like, "It's
Mm.
amazing what I can now do," and I
Right.
a lot of people don't understand how to use AI, and once the light bulb clicks on and they realize exactly what AI can do for them, that I
Hmm.
think adoption will really start to take off.
Yep. I do too. I have a theory though that I feel like consumer will really drive like enterprise adoption in the way that so we have Apple just released like Apple Intelligence or whatever. And I think when more and more CEOs and senior leaders are constantly interacting with AI every day on their phones and maybe ChatGPT does a much better job of like um, you know um, productizing their tool, I think then companies will start to say, okay, this thing is pretty cool. Let's do something more with this. You know, right now it kind of seems like AI gets adopted through the engineering team in some random project in a company, and it doesn't proliferate all that well in the organization because there's no like cohesive buy-in from everybody in the business. So I think it's going to happen personally from more from the consumer side than like the enterprise side. But I think it'll Salesforce, obviously the big business applications out there like HubSpot and HRS systems, when they add more AI into their products, then businesses are kind of automatically adopting AI. They're
Right,
forced into using it.
right, right.
But to me, those tend to be more smoke and mirror right now. I don't get a lot out of those yet.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think AI is going to be absorbed into, as if you've used, a tool like Superhuman or something like that, where,
Yeah,
you start to realize again, or the tools that can transcribe a meeting, and then you can just basically ask the AI model, okay, summarize the top 3 points, or tell me what my to-dos are from this meeting, and it spits out all of that for you. I think, but again, that's AI being built into tools that you already use on a day-to-day basis, and now those
right.
tools are just going to become much more user friendly.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. The Salesforces of the world will innovate. There'll be consumer innovation that'll kind of connect into people, the brains of leadership more and more, and I think it'll happen. I think the adoption will be faster than cloud and some of the other things
Yeah,
that have happened in our lifetime for sure. I think a lot because of just the sheer power of and business impact of AI. When I look at cloud, I don't think of it as like, wow, it had the biggest business impact in the world. Oh my God. I mean, it made the lives maybe of engineers more interesting and stuff, but with AI, you're talking about AI-based products that can truly help customers in radically new ways. AI that can improve operational efficiency and gross margin. I mean, there's so many applications of this, and for us being on the technology side, like this is stuff we've been thinking about for decades. It's that like sci-fi fantasy world, that one day we'll have AI. It's starting to actually happen when you look at these AI startups and demos. Do you ever do demos with AI startups at all? I'm sure you see a lot that comes across your desk.
yeah, yeah. So I'm actually active in a angel investing group, and we focus on women-led businesses. And we have, we've seen several AI startups come our way. One, as an example, is a company that is using AI in order to analyze um, basically like MRI images,
Mm,
and in order to identify tumors and cancer and stuff like that. And they're
yeah,
finding that AI is better at that than
right.
you know
That's a perfect example.
technicians.
Yep.
So So yeah,
Yep,
it's exciting to see some of the uses.
it is. That's actually a good segue, Tricia, into I remember when I first heard that you had taken over as CTO of a company. I remember thinking in my mind, well, number one, how proud and excited I was for you. That was really cool. But also, I was like, oh, well, now I have two women CTOs on my Rolodex of CTOs. One was the CTO, Warburg Pincus, and the other is you. And what I guess the biggest question is do you view uh, being a woman leader in tech as somewhat of a challenge? And if so, what are some of those challenges? What did you experience, or maybe you didn't experience anything substantial, but like kind of can you walk us a little bit through like when that happened? What was the stuff going through in your mind in the early stage experiences of being a CTO?
I still think there's definitely challenges. A lot of the times, the in a technology industry, you're still the only woman in the room when you're, in a
Yeah.
leadership meeting. Um, and so, there's I think a lot of the times, as a woman CTO, there's uh, a bit of credibility you have to build up, put it
Mm,
that way, where you
yeah.
actually have to prove that you've got the technical chops to do the job, so to
Hmm.
speak. Whereas I
Yep.
think, most men it's assumed, whereas
Right.
with a woman it's something that you kind of have to, earn
Sure.
the respect.
Hmm.
Um,
I
I,
definitely
I
see
do
that.
think I do think, from a I think there's also, differences in communication styles, but I think that that's something that, permeates any business from any business perspective. I don't think that's specific to, uh,
Mm, yeah.
a woman CTO. Um, I think, having some of, and not at my last job, but at a previous company, I actually was leading a team, and the team was based in Russia, and I
Hmm.
actually, had one of the men who reported to me, eventually ended up looking me, in the eye after we had had a debate about a technical topic, and he goes, for a woman, you're pretty smart, and it's culturally, he was just like that was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I could see that happening.
there's definitely, I think it's more of a, you kind of have to walk into the room and first prove yourself before you can get your message across.
Yeah. Whereas like men have to do that less frequently. Yeah,
Yes.
I definitely see that. Was it difficult for you, just irrespective of gender, to make the leap into CTO the first year? Like, how was that for you? Was it like just a big learning experience? Did you already know what to do? Like, can you kind of describe that?
So I have led product and engineering at other organizations, but at smaller companies, and it was, mainly, I think the biggest leap with when I moved into the CTO role was, it was a broader set of responsibilities. There was,
Hmm.
all the cloud ops site reliability group, rolled
Sure.
up to me,
Yeah,
and that is an incredibly important part of,
absolutely.
being a successful technology organization.
No
So,
question. Can I ask you a
uh,
funny question though
sure.
about that? Now that you've been a CTO before, or now that you've been a CTO, will you cut me some slack from when we were working together?
Yes.
I mean, oh my God, I was driven crazy. I'm sure you have crazy stories from running everything. It's just such a big responsibility.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. Definitely a
Yeah.
lot of moving parts. So I had product development, product management, cloud ops slash site reliability, test automation. And
Mm.
eventually they also decided to, after a reorg, decided to roll customer support up underneath me.
Oh
Um,
boy.
which, yeah, and
Yeah.
that was, anyway. So there was definitely a lot of moving parts, a lot going on,
Yeah.
and you learn to basically, um, you can't micromanage. You have to build out a good team. You
Mm,
have to work with
yeah.
that team and make sure that everybody's
Yeah.
working together well.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any tips for folks who are at the maybe VP level trying to break into the CTO level or the chief product officer? Like, how do you kind of get into that role? Is it all just like through relationships, or do you feel like you have to do some specific things? What's your take on jumping to that executive, C-suite, I should say, officer level?
So I think a huge job of being a successful CTO or CPO is being able to work well with the rest of the executive leadership team. And, at that point, you're also getting exposed to the board of directors. So you need to learn how to, think strategically, be data driven,
All
um,
right.
be able to uh, network with the other parts of the organization, understand what, their pain points are and how what you
Right.
might be, what your organization is doing is impacting them.
Yeah.
Um, and support, be able to then contribute and support to any, critical business decisions that are being made.
Hmm.
The last
Yeah.
company that I was at, we went through a major pivot about once a year, where we
Hmm.
literally changed the direction of the company to focus on a new aspect of the
Yeah.
market that we were going after.
Yeah. It really does require, it seems like, a very strategic mind, while simultaneously you have to be able to execute tactically day in and day out on like the engineering side, even the product side. Um, Somebody I was talking to the other day was talking about you can make the leap into CTO by having a good relationship with different people, right? You sort of get handpicked to do that role by maybe a board or a CEO or somebody like that. You can also sort of like prove yourself out in a really, really difficult project that you deliver. Sometimes that really makes you shine. It makes people recognize you. And I think these days it's a lot of like self-advocacy. You just have to constantly talk about what accomplishments you've done and like network your way into those kinds of CTO roles. There's all these groups also that are out there now where you were mentioning some of them where all the product people hang out and stuff,
Right.
and you can be part of those groups. You can get in through that way, but it is like it's still a pretty exclusive club, of CTOs and chief product officers. You really have to, I find, you have to have like just a faceted capability. And I think probably the hardest thing, you tell me if you agree with this, for especially VPs of engineering, is the communication when they get into chief technology officer level. Like talking to the board is not at all like talking to your own team.
Right.
Talking to the CEO is not at all like you're talking to your own team. And that jump is difficult. I know it took me a long time to figure out. I'm probably still figuring it out, but it is definitely that communication doesn't come naturally. Now, you were always a great communicator. I remember from when we were working together, but I know some brilliant chief architects and VPs of engineering that are not the greatest in communication. I think that's what keeps them limited, actually, from getting to that CTO role.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, I was talking, I think a lot of the times, like private equity firms especially, are looking for, CTOs that can come in and really, make sure that the engineering cycles that the company is expending is focused on the right things.
Right.
And there's this level of, I wouldn't like, just not knowing, like they're not sure what the engineering organization's doing, what they're working on, and if they're working on the right things. And there's this sort of like, we need somebody to come in and sort of
Hmm.
dive into that and make and then communicate back to us in a way that sort of wins our trust, that what they're working on is really, impactful to the business. because
Hmm.
we're just not sure. and,
Yeah.
and a lot of the times, engineering organizations are dealing with things like technical debt and things like that that
Right.
are slowing them down, and they don't know how to actually articulate to the business how this is impacting the bottom line and
Right.
why fixing the
Yeah.
technical debt will be a good thing. As an
Yeah.
example, like they don't know how to translate what they're working on
Hmm.
into
Yeah.
this is what the business impact is.
Yeah. 100%. And it's funny you brought this technical debt thing up, but I always tell VPs of engineering and CTOs that I hire that I always tell them if you can you create traceability between technical debt and business outcomes and impact, then you have an actual chance of convincing someone. But if
Yes.
you can't create that connection, forget even bringing it up in a board
Yes.
meeting or anywhere else because it's just meaningless to the business side, or it's only meaningful to you. So figure out how to connect it to the business outcomes and the business KPIs, and then people are going to be all ears. Why wouldn't they be? They want things to go faster, right? But yeah, I think community. You're right. I think that creating the right language between the two sides is vital. So what was in your mind like? You're obviously a great communicator. You have a computer science background. I've seen you do Agile. I've seen all these different things. What was a challenge? One challenge that you could point out to becoming CTO?
I think part of the challenge for me was is I've, as I said, I've run product and engineering in several organizations, and as I've moved from organization to organization, they've used different technology stacks and different, there's always, learning the architecture of the product and the technology stack and all the
Yeah.
moving parts and how to make that all work together well,
Mm,
so it's a
yeah.
well-oiled machine. There's a big learning curve there. And
100%.
so it's also realizing that you even as CTO, you may not be the smartest person in the room because you may not know this technology stack by like the back of your
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
So, it's being able to find the right people in the organization um, to basically, pull out, a lot of that information and start to figure out, okay, why
Yeah.
isn't the machine well oiled at this part? What
Right.
do we need to do to fix it? But it's not doing that because you are the technical expert. It's doing that because, you've dealt with a lot of these problems at other
Hmm.
organizations, but on a totally different technology stack, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, actually, I would have to agree with you. That's one of the most difficult things. I would agree that, and maybe I would say in a slightly different way. Tell me what you think. But I think people underestimate how difficult it is to like onboard in a way where they're learning the machinery of it all in a complete way. And like I remember being in a company once earlier in my career where like 1 year after I joined, I learned some nugget about how some engineering team in the bowels of R&D did something, and I was like, I couldn't believe that that's how they were doing it. But I didn't find out about that for like a year, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like we expect everybody to kind of like onboard in a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. CTOs, I'm talking about chief product officers. But really, the truth is that like getting a handle on the machine of it all and then optimizing it is an extremely complex process. And even in small companies, with 20 million in revenue, they're complicated. So that tends to be definitely a big challenge. No question about it. I always think that there should be a CTO onboarding product out there, that helps to see the right information at the right time and understand it all. Because honestly, it's like I don't get much. I don't know about you, but I get more from talking to people than documentation. Are
Yes.
you the same?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And just, I mean, I'm a big believer in, I mean, this is an agile thing, but retrospectives is there's bound to have things go wrong. But then sitting down with the team and really starting to understand, okay, you know, why did things go wrong? How do we prevent it from happening in the future? Like, I,
Yeah.
I will tell you, in this previous organization, there was a ton of iteration I had to go through with the cloud ops team because they were just a lot of things were pretty outdated in that area. Again, not my necessarily my area of expertise, but I knew that what we were doing was outdated and needed to be improved. And
Yeah, you had good instincts about it.
right,
Yeah.
and iterating through some of the things that we went through from from a cloud ops perspective and figuring out how to improve it.
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't that it was my area of expertise, but it was sort of exposing that and basically and then making that group feel comfortable with, okay guys, we know that you guys can do this job
Hmm.
better, and let's figure out how to get it done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly. Well, the next stop for you is CEO. You ever thinking about running the whole ship?
no. I don't think.
Okay. Oh, yeah. It's funny, my old boss, I talk to her all the time about how difficult being a CTO is, and then she always reminds me, she's like, CEO is way harder, Bobby. I'm like, yeah, you're right. CEO is way harder. But yeah, I think we have more and more business-oriented CTOs such as yourself coming into that role nowadays. It used to be like exclusively the realm. You have to be some kind of like engineering Svengali to become CTO. Now it doesn't have to be as much like that. And you have to be really good at communication, strategy, business, things like that, and be smart enough to call people out on engineering and product when they're not doing the right things. But yeah, interesting. The role seems to be like kind of changing. Um, getting into a little bit of sort of, we touched upon it earlier, but change management was something that I've been waiting to get you on this podcast to ask you about because in the last few years, I've had to be a change agent in a lot of different organizations. And you know this from your years of expertise on it, that it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you sort of like just kind of like a first principle thing, which is whether it's like digital transformation, agile transformation, I don't know, pivoting to a new stack, what is it about large groups of people organized into a company? Why is it so hard to get them to change, even though they had the same exact final destination, but just getting them to do something differently seems so incredibly difficult? Do you have any insight on that?
um well, geez, there's a lot of reasons why transformations or change, big organizational changes don't work. A lot of the times the the North Star, the goal isn't well set or
Mm.
communicated. It may be set, but not, communicated.
Hmm.
So people don't even understand what the end result is that's trying to be achieved. They know
Yeah.
that they know they're being asked to change, but they don't know either the why. That's a big, why are we changing? Why is what we're
Right.
doing? Because a lot of people are like, change is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So if you don't give them a good reason for why what they're currently doing today isn't good enough and why they need to change, then the motivation for to change isn't there.
Right.
Um, and they can't envision how things are going to be better on the other, on the going on the other side of the change, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, I think a lot of it comes down to, defining, okay, what do we envision what the to be state is going to look like, and
Yeah.
why do we think that is better than the as is state?
Why is important. Yeah.
Yeah.
My view is a lot of it is that people sort of get used to a certain thing, and getting them unused to it is just an inherently psychologically difficult thing to do that I'm not sure companies should spend so much time trying to do it. Like, in other words, like there's some people who are meant to be on a certain bus and some people who are meant to be not on that bus, on some other bus. And companies need to know. I mean, the CEO of Pepsi famously says this, where she was like, at a certain time point in time, you just got to be like, okay, if you don't want to do this, maybe it's time for you to do something else. And I don't think we explored that enough. We're just kind of always beating our head trying to be a change management, and some people just don't want to change their old ways of doing things. I had a person who we were doing a big modernization for a bank, and the person just wanted to stay, I'm dating myself here totally, but on AS400, would not want to get off of it. And I was like, we get it. Work for a bank that's still going to do AS400. Be happy there. So I think change management, yeah, I think you're right. I also think people are just sometimes get, a lot of times, much more than we think. They just get used to things, and it's like you can have the world's greatest PowerPoints, presentations, you can bring in celebrities, you can, you can do all of the things you want. They just keep reverting back to the old way, especially if they've been doing it for 4 or 5 or 6 or more years. Then it's like really hard to change them. That's why, like, I think safe is so hard to implement in some companies,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the times, yes. I think back again to my old organization where we were going through the biggest change we went through was in the cloud ops team, and I ended up eventually bringing in a new leader,
Yeah,
and the change accelerated, immediately because
right.
he was able to come in and really, as opposed to resisting the change, he was like, "Yeah, oh gosh, there's no way we can continue working this way. This isn't
Yeah,
sustainable, and there's a better way, and here's the better
yeah.
way." Like so yeah, I think a lot of people who don't know, as I said, what what life's going to be like in the to be state and don't know how to even
Hmm.
lead a team to
Yeah,
get there, will
yeah,
resist change.
yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Um, Now that you've sort of experienced running the whole gamut of product and engineering, like, what are the areas where you still like to focus and put more of your energies into versus the areas you like to kind of delegate out to somebody and one of your lieutenants or whatever?
So I mean, I tend to work from a from a product led perspective. So I really like to go out and understand, okay, what are the pain points we're trying to solve for? How can we, innovatively apply technology to come up with solutions for those pain points, and sort of go through that discovery process and iterate towards a good solution. So that's kind of the where I tend to migrate to,
Yeah.
where again I am not necessarily like a subject matter expert, is areas like cloud ops, and I'm just, as an
Hmm.
example,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but it's an incredibly important function in a
Sure.
technology organization. So, from my perspective, I'd go out and hire somebody who's really strong in that area, and,
Hmm.
let them do their thing. Um, so yeah, I would tend to focus on, I would consider sort of the product management, and then, bleeding into how do we engineer a solution, how do we actually go through an iterative process to come up with a cool solution to that problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That seems like a wise focus area. One thing I'm intrigued by is your definition of product led. Like, how do you kind of define it for a company?
it's an organization that lets that is allowing the product organization to discover what is the right solution to bring to market for their customer.
Yeah.
So going through and again identifying, okay, this is the or the business as a whole needs to agree to what pain points you're going after, and that there's
Hmm.
ROI in solving those pain points. I think that's a overall sort of business that strategy that needs to be agreed to. But then
Yeah.
the product organization needs to go through a discovery process of saying, okay, what's the right way of solving that problem?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
how are we going to, come up with a solution that's going to be ahead of our competition? And
Hmm.
a lot of the times, organizations that aren't product led they're looking for the product organization to just execute, and so it's almost
Yeah,
dictated to them what to build.
right. Yeah, like we were talking about earlier. Um, I hear a lot about product-led growth companies where when you add the word growth at the end,
Yeah,
it kind of changes it a little bit where it's like, okay, well, a salesperson, if it's sales led, traditionally, you go salesperson toss to the customer and sign them up, you get some revenue. Product led growth might be that you hang your product shingle out there on the web and there's some DIY way where the customer, without talking to any salespeople, can buy your product. And you have product led growth, which is literally growth, revenue, etc through just the product itself. Maybe it's like an
like it
upsell
goes
within the
viral.
product. Yeah, yeah, stuff like that. And then sales-led growth. Um, I think that companies get confused between being product-led at the macroscopic level, the way you were describing it, and specifically like product-led growth. I think product-led growth is like a different thing than just the company being product-led, right?
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, the product-led growth is like, yeah, like products that go viral and that
Yeah,
can, yes, yeah,
it's a different beast altogether.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, they can both be happening at the same time in a company, but product-led growth is kind of a different go-to-market approach versus product-led generally. It seems to be like how you run the company or whatever, and how you discover what's going to make you, um, kind of successful as far as solving customer problems. How can companies, let's say it's a tech-enabled service company, so they've had a service as part of the business that's been running for years and years and years. And let's say it's in healthcare, for example. And then they have a little bit of product, but it's like internal product. How does a company like that pivot into being more macroscopically product led? Because I mean, there's nothing wrong with being service led, right? They've been making plenty of money service led, but the CEO wants to be product led because maybe they're looking at the multiples they would get on a
right,
business that was product led.
right.
How do you pivot them if you're the CTO?
To being product-led?
I saved my hardest question for the end.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you would need to look at what services they are providing, what's potentially repeatable, what could be automated, and how do you then, start generating maybe subscription revenue from that.
Mm,
But you need to start figuring out, okay, how can you apply technology to solve the same problems that the
right.
services that are being provided are currently solving. So I'm
Hmm.
assuming there's some repeatability in the service and there's
Right.
some, opportunity to automate there
Yeah.
and build out a product that you can sell versus having to have, services do it.
And yes, absolutely. And you see so many products years later that you think started off as a pure product, but actually came from a service. You just don't realize it as a consumer of it. So I think that's certainly a path. Like if you're trying to pivot from services more to product, examine what services you're giving to your customers and figure out how you can do them better, faster, stronger with technology slash product, and then offer them with a slightly different business model, pricing plan, what have you. And that's one route. The other thing is to, I think, go to your um, organization and literally ask them. I think like, okay, so what are the products that you've been thinking of? And then I think go to your customers and ask them, what are the products that could help you? And then start thinking about a couple of like low cost experiments that you could do, you know? I think that's a thing. But I think my view now, after having done the pivot a bunch of different times, is take it slow and steady. I think the companies fail when they try to take on too much. You know,
Yeah.
they'll try to do like a pivot all in one year from service led to product led, and they'll think, why isn't it working and stuff. And the truth is they just didn't have any of the underlying capabilities to be product led. I mean,
No,
you need to develop the muscle first, right?
I mean,
That's
you
my
need,
take on it.
yeah, I mean, you need everything wrapped around developing and delivering a product. You need a good support organization. You need,
Yep.
depending if the product's intuitive, you may not need, implementation and training, but, again, it depends on, what you're going to need to build out to build
Yeah.
out a successful
Agreed. It's a tough challenge, but it's a fun one if you get it right. Tricia, we're nearing the end of our time. I always like to kind of wrap up with a few nuggets of wisdom. You've been doing this technology thing for a while. Like, what are some things that our listeners can take away from this where maybe they're a VP of product and they're, running a team for the first time and they've got a group of, what's the typical, it's like five or six or seven product
or.
people and like 50, 60 engineers. So they're already outnumbered. But what are some of the tips for being successful in a product management role at that VP level?
I think you need, wow, there's a lot to be successful
Mm, hmm.
for as a VP of product. One is you need to understand what the company's growth goals are and where the company thinks their next big growth opportunity is. And you need to make
Yeah,
sure that the product strategy aligns to those growth goals. And so everything that you are, when you are presenting the roadmap, um, should be, you should be able to translate that into how you are positively impacting the business. And the roadmap needs to span not only, new capabilities that, for instance, the sales organization is going to get excited about going out and selling, but potentially, addressing technical debt. And like you need to look at all aspects of what building out that solution is and build a roadmap
right.
that, covers all those different areas. But again, be able to talk to why those investments make sense to the business.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, you
absolutely.
ideally you want to be data driven, so you
Hmm.
want to be able to back up a lot of when you are placing bets for the business and talking about where you think the business needs to invest next. You want to be able to go do your homework and really come back with, sort of almost a spreadsheet that shows the ROI.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
um, you so as head of product, you want to, as I said, you want to be able to represent. We want to have a good working relationship with engineering. You need to
Hmm.
understand what's driving them, where technical debt may be, weighing them
Yeah.
down, where, how they are approaching innovation, how quickly they are being able to innovate. So you need to be able to work very closely with engineering from that perspective, but you also need to turn around at the same time and work very closely with the sales and marketing organization in order to understand, how are they meeting their quota targets? Where are they going to, how is the roadmap going to support what they need to do from a sales perspective in order to allow the company to meet their revenue goals?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. That's
it's
another great one.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I could keep going.
Yeah.
It's a tough
No,
job.
it's a good
There's a
list.
lot to it.
Yeah. There's a lot to being a successful VP of product. I'll just throw a few nuggets out there. I think one is absolutely aligning yourself to what your CEO wants,
Yep.
what the board wants. What are they actually trying to do with the business? Are they after like huge growth? Are they after like margin? Are they after expansion? Are they after retaining their customer base? Like, what is the number one, two, three priorities that the business actually has? Instead of being, I see too many product people saying, these are my priorities. I'm going to try to implement them on this business. I
Yeah.
don't think that's the right approach. I think the second thing is, like you were alluding, we were both talking about earlier, this like product is concept of product being the hub to all these different spokes in an organization. I think if you can get those relationships right with sales, engineering, marketing, executive suite, support, relationship building is, I think, absolutely up there. And then I think three is trying your best to, this is going to be probably a little weird one, but trying your best not to have any sacred cows. Like the roadmap is a roadmap. Okay. It might get tanked 3 weeks after you build it. You may pivot. And I've just seen the more successful product VPs, they just sort of think of the roadmap as a useful tool. It's not the end all be all of everything. And they have no sacred cows about any projects or products. They're ready to pivot and stuff. And if you can kind of stay kind of agnostic that way, I think that's super powerful as well.
The
So
other
yeah,
thing
that's
I
my
would,
theory. Yeah.
yeah, I would totally agree. And the other thing I would also add to that is you were talking about like their, tying back to the corporate, what the corporate goals are, whether that's customer retention or, going after a new market opportunity or, the problem I've had in my
Mm.
personally is that you walk in and a lot of the time CEOs want to do it all. Like they want
Yeah.
they want to retain all the customers, plus they want to go after this new market
Yeah, totally.
opportunity,
Yeah.
and um, you need to then be able to navigate that and basically,
Yeah.
come up with a way of prioritizing, okay, what are we going to focus on first?
Yeah.
Because we can't do it all successfully.
Yeah. That is a very difficult task. Absolutely. Trying to get the executive team and the whole business to just prioritize and, not try to do 15 things at once. And that I find is something that I think starts to get better if you can bring in a framework. If you can, it doesn't have to be a formal mega framework, but I remember when we were working at the same company, we're using Run Grow, the Gartner Run Grow Transform kind of framework. But there has to be some way to explain, like, here's the demand, here's the capacity, here are the things that we want to do. Here's what gets left off the table. Because oftentimes I think ELTs think that VPs of product and VPs of engineering are just hedging their bets and they're giving them a roadmap that's way too conservative and they should be able to do so much more and stuff than what they're telling us. But I think the way to bridge that gap is to be clear about what is the demand and what is the capacity and not really hide anything, but be really good about explaining that connection between the two sides. I have a friend, Alberto Silveira, who wrote a book about this stuff around this idea of like hidden work that engineering is doing that never gets propagated up to the business level and stuff like that. How do you kind of like, I don't know if he gets into this part, but one thing of mine that's I've always been kind of interested in is like, how do you communicate all the hidden work engineering is doing? You know, and that ends up taking like 20% of their capacity.
Right.
That's, if you can put that stuff in a framework, I think it'd be very powerful. Okay,
Yeah, I agree.
Tricia, I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today. I always learned so much from listening to you, and I'm sure our audience will have taken a lot from this discussion. So I want to thank our listeners as well for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on the Technocratic Podcast. In the meantime, keep the shark swimming.